Vampires are mythological or folkloric revenants who subsist by feeding on the blood of the living. In folk tales, the undead vampires often visited loved ones and caused mischief or deaths in the neighborhoods in which they inhabited. Commentators have offered many theories for the origins of vampire beliefs, trying to explain the superstition and sometimes mishistory caused by vampires. Everything ranging from premature burial to the early ignorance of the body's decomposition cycle after death has been cited as the cause for the belief in vampires.
Lilith is said to be queen of the night. In the beginning, she was the first wife of Adam, and then was banished from Eden, sentenced to roam the desolate world forever. Cain was the son of Adam who killed his brother Abel. Cain was then banished from Eden and began to develop a very strong bloodlust. Cain is known as the first murderer. Lilith was created by God when Adam became lonely despite the things God had placed around him. God split Adam in half, creating two separate beings, Adam and his female counterpart Lilith. There is no time set when the Garden of Eden was created because no one was around to record it. However, this creation myth takes place shortly after Lilith and Cain were banished from the Garden of Eden. The bulk of this vampire creation myth takes place outside of the Garden of Eden, where both Lilith and Cain were banished. The Garden of Eden was located in a Middle Eastern area known as Tigris Euphrates. Lilith wandered about the world, endeavored to enter Eden again, and shortly after, Cain went in search of company and found Lilith and her children in a cave. There are two reasons for which Lilith was banished from Eden. One being that she would not submit and wanted to be equal to her male counterpart during sex. The other being that when God presented Adam with everything to name, Adam overlooked all the dark things such as night and poisons. Lilith began to name these things and became obsessed with the power they brought. When she was banished from Eden, she was cursed to become obsessed with the blood of drinking childbearing women. When Cain was banished from the murder of his brother Abel, he came across Lilith and her children, where Lilith taught him to draw power from the people whose blood he drew. He was obsessed with killing. When Lilith and he had children, they were just as bloodthirsty, creating the first vampires. The legend draws most of its ideas from the Bible because it refers to the Garden of Eden and the story of Adam and Eve. Lilith and Cain are referred to as the first vampires because they left the Garden of Eden before Eve ate the apple, turning her and Adam mortal. Therefore, they were still blessed or cursed with being immortal.
Incubus and succubus are mythical creatures from the medieval Christian demonology that perform their evil deeds by doing the deed with their victims. The incubus is the male version of the demon, while the succubus is the female counterpart. The exact origin of the myth is unknown, though St. Augustine mentions sexual creatures in some of his works. The first actual mention of succubus comes from the 1300s. Regions of the origin, the terms incubus and succubus are European in origin, but similar beings appear in the mythology of most regions of the world, as they are incorporeal. Geography is largely irrelevant. The purpose of an incubus/succubus spirit is to impregnate you. The main key to deliverance is to abort and or kill that which they have successfully planted in you. There are a few basic variations on the myth. In some accounts, the incubus and succubus are two separate demons. The incubus impregnates woman with its demon seed, while the succubus impregnates itself using a human male. In others, the incubus and succubus are the same shape-shifting demon which needs to collect semen as it succubus first before it transfers into an incubus to impregnate a woman. Judas Iscariot is the biblical figure traditionally charged with betraying Jesus to the Roman soldiers for 30 pieces of silver. The Book of Aguila, written in the 843 AD by a Catholic monk named Ad, states that God punished Judas by restoring his life after he had hanged himself. One legend says that the vampires of old, to include Lilith and Cain and the clan of the Iscariots, had gathered into the city of Atlantis and were living beneath the temple at the time the great city fell into the ocean. In the Gospel of Matthew, when the Judas goes into the chief priests, he asks, "What will you give me if I deliver Jesus to you?" The verse suggests Judas betrayed Jesus out of greed in the Gospel of John. After Jesus gives Judas the piece of dipped bread, Satan entered into him. The verse suggests Satan's spirit entered into Judas and caused him to do evil. There is a legend among the Hebrew people that God cursed Judas and said that Judas and his descendants would roam their earth as creatures of the night until the end of time. They believe that Judas Iscariot had red hair in life and that vampires with red hair were directly descendants from Judas.
The first Lamai is suspected to be the queen of Libya. The queen of Libya was said to be a truly beautiful young woman who was often visited by Zeus. This legend is rooted deep within ancient Greek mythology and still haunts those who believe in such gods today. The beginning of this myth took place in the Queen of Libya's palace. When the myth was first created, all people looked to the gods and goddesses of different elements, such as god of the sea and goddess of the harvest. This myth took place in Libya, but has carried over into ancient Greece, where it was documented. The first Lamai was the queen of Libya, so a good portion of the tale took place in her palace and the area around it after she was changed. This myth came alive when Hera, Zeus's wife, found out that he had sexual intercourse with the queen herself. Enraged, she murdered all the queen's children, filling the queen with hatred she could not control. Something switched inside the queen in order to cause her to become the monster that she did. She would seduce men into coming into bed with her and then feast on their blood and flesh. The Lamai became a feared but irresistible group of women who would become these things if something tragic happened to them or they committed suicide. Lamai were conceived as handsomely ghostly women who, by voluptuous artifices, attracted young men in order to enjoy their fresh, youthful, and pure flesh and blood. Though the Lamai were not thought of as vampires back then, today they are considered to be one of the first groups to take on a vampiristic lifestyle. These myths do not affect our daily lives as they once did during their time of beginning. Many people are actually quite interested as to whether or not each of these supposed first vampires were real people or a story told to scare others. These days, vampires are painted as beautiful but dangerous creatures that many people are drawn to. All these current films and books could have stemmed from these ancient demons who once shared the same qualities.